Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's webinar on preparing for 2023, your most profitable year yet. We're just going to give everyone a couple moments here to filter through. And once that occurs, I will then be popping up a poll here just to get a good understanding of the room. This will help us cater some of the content this evening. I'm joined here today by Mr. Andrew Byrne, one of our consultants here at Cirrus Consulting Group. My name is Matthew Donato. I will be one of the co-hosts and moderators of this evening's webinar. So like I said, we're just going to give everyone a couple moments here to filter through. Once that's occurred, we'll pop up the polls and we'll get this evening started. Excellent. So we're just going to pull up the polls here. As I said, if you wouldn't mind answering, it'll help us cater some of tonight's information and that way make it a little bit more specific to each and every one of you on this evening's webinar. Excellent. Perfect. We have a number of other people joining here as well. As I said, when you just have a moment, please do fill out the poll. This will just, like I said, help us get a better understanding of who's in the room and help cater the information for tonight's webinar. Excellent. Okay, so I see there's a number of us in the room this evening that are in leased scenarios. Some that are planning to open their first practices or relocate their practices. Some that are looking to stay put and renegotiate the lease. Renovating the practice is another one here. Relocating to a new location. Some with their lease coming up for expiry within the next 2 years. As well as some of those that are already on a month-to-month status. So Andrew and I will both touch on some of the concerns with that and how to leverage the negotiations at this point in time. And I see some of you here too are due within the next 2 to 5 years. So definitely a very diverse room in terms of situations and scenarios. But thank you all that participated in the poll. It definitely gives us a better understanding of your scenario. So, like I said, welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm one of the senior consultants and team leads here at Cirrus Consulting Group, joined by the wonderful Mr. Andrew Byrne, one of our other consultants here at Cirrus. And Andrew, over to you. Give us a bit of a background on yourself.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session. A little bit about me. Previously a commercial real estate broker there for 8 years. Prior to that, I was a coordinator for one of the largest independent developers here in North America. And prior to that, I was in real estate financing there for 3 years. A little bit about me there. I think I'd like to start off tonight's session really with three sobering numbers: 85, 54, and 80. So just bear with me 1 second. '85 refers to the 85% of dentists who actually have provisions within their lease that prevent them from selling. 54, that's the percentage of dentists that are actually overpaying for their rent, and 80%, that's the percent of landlords who actually structure their lease in which to take at least 50% of the proceeds of the sale. Quite sobering numbers there. So the purpose of tonight's webinar So we will cover the seven main financial negotiables of your dental office lease, how to win those. We'll cover the 9 steps for a successful practice startup. We'll talk a little bit about, who should be on your team, and that will be included in the new practice checklist. A little bit about buying, leasing, relocating, and those that want to start secondary practice. And we'll also talk about, those traps that are contained within a letter of intent or your current lease and can cost you $100,000 plus. Little bit about us and Cirrus Consulting Group. So we are a healthcare and dental specialized tenant rep firm, founded by dentists for dentists originally in 1994. We have successfully negotiated over 13,000 dental and medical office leases. We have an in-house legal team, veteran lease negotiators and consultants, of which I am one. Annually, we represent 500 plus doctors throughout North America, and we deliver over 100 CE credit seminars annually. And you can find us at most of the major dental conventions, including the Yankee and of course the Dental Association there in California. Matthew.
Yeah, excellent. And this is a major component here as well, as Andrew was talking about, what makes us unique, right? Everything for us is done in-house. But one of the other components that really does make us unique is this here, right? When you're looking at the financials, when you're going through those negotiations, when you're starting out your practice for the first time, and you see that rental rate proposed to you, what is the first thing that you do? You're always wondering, is that fair? Right? Does that make sense? Now, what we do and how we are so successful through our negotiations, not only in regards to the legal terms and provisions of the lease, but also in regards to the financials, is through this. For us, we have proprietary data in which we track over 95 billion square feet across the United States and Canada. We have over 4.6 million properties tracked, over 1.5 million verified listings. Right. So when it comes down to it, when we're looking at the financials, we're looking at how is that rental rate comparable to the space beside me, the space down the road. We have all that data that we utilize through our negotiations, because one thing that you need to do when you're negotiating the rates is you need to negotiate them on fact, not on feeling. Right. The biggest mistake is that I hear is, well, I told the landlord that I feel that it should be around $22 a square foot. Well, maybe it is, but unless you look at the proprietary data and that that's actually the case, it's very difficult to negotiate. So we want to go into that negotiation, not going, oh, I feel it should be 22, but actually, Mr. Landlord, I know that it's $21.50 a square foot based off of X, Y, and Z, right? You can call the brokers, you can call the properties that are next door and try to get those listings. But, that takes time, energy, and effort out of your day. And that's really one of our core competencies here, is making sure that you have the appropriate financials.
Thank you, Matthew. So let's go over the 7 financial negotiables here that we will address you commonly find in the lease. So first of all, let's talk about base rent. For a great deal of my time, I've worked with landlords, and we have to look at how does a landlord look at base rent and in what they're trying to achieve. Let me give you an example. Say, if a landlord wants to get $20, if they think that my break-even point, when I add in everything that includes maybe base rent, maybe fixturing period, also some legal fees and the 4% brokerage commission, I would like to see $20 as an example. $22 would make me really, really happy. How do I achieve that? Well, I'm going to have my broker basically market the property at $24. Sure enough, the broker markets it at $24, and they attract a tenant, a dentist that's goes through all the stages and kind of thinks, you know what, this is all very well, but you know, I'm thinking more $20. And the broker turns around and says, look, why don't we compromise there at $22? And the tenant says, yeah, okay, fair enough. Not knowing that basically they've just left $2 a square foot there on the table. The landlord's ecstatic. $2 a square foot might not seem a lot, but when you look at the monthly and then the yearly and then over 10 years plus, and Matthew will touch on that next, that's an awful lot of money. You know, we have to remember that, you know, we don't get what we deserve. You know, we basically get what we negotiate. So the only way that we can really back up that $20 that I'm aware of anyway is just on data, just on fact, just on a proposal on this is what, according to our data, this is what we know that within the area we should be paying. Annual increases, if you're overpaying, you're looking at 3% year on year. As I say, Matthew will touch on that next. One area really that deserves a webinar on its own is common area maintenance. Now, let's face it, there are many ways that the landlord can massage the numbers to get $24 a square foot. Yes, we do have the data, you know what the CAM fee should be approximately, but I remember this. One of the landlords that I worked exclusively with owned 4 plazas. I'm very good friends actually with. He has a couple of other real estate properties as well. And in one of these properties, he's just had a single tenant. And the tenant on the one day called him up and said, you know what, Mr. Landlord, my HVAC unit, it's packed in. It's getting pretty warm here. And my friend said, look, unfortunately, you know, if you look at your lease, there happens to be replacement language, whereas that's down to you to replace that. Now, for some of you, you might not think that HVAC, you know, an HVAC unit isn't much. Well, in this particular case, I'll give you an idea of what the tenant actually had to go through here. So basically, they had to get in a new unit. They had to secure permits. They had to hire off-duty policemen to stop the traffic so that a crane could come in, pull off the old unit of the roof, put it on a flat deck, put up the new unit, the new HVAC unit, secure that with a crew, a lot of people involved. The old unit was returned to a factory. And after all was said and done, we're looking at over $300,000. That's a lot of money. Now, my landlord friend wasn't exactly thrilled with it, you know, but to just give you an idea, you know, from a landlord's perspective, they've kind of been burned, a lot of them before, for an awful lot of money. So if they can pass through some of these fees, they will do so. And replacement language is one to definitely look for. I would suggest, if you get a chance, if you've got a lease, look out for a replacement language. Number 4, fixturing. I think the whole idea here with fixturing is really having enough time there for your fixturing period when you are relocating or starting anew. You know, even just a couple of months out and you're just getting in the cabinetry and you're still waiting on approvals, 2 months at $5,000, let's face it, there's $10,000 right there. Whereas if it was structured properly, you shouldn't be paying that at all. Free rent, well, as far as I'm concerned, nothing really worthwhile in life is that free. And what you'll find with free rent is, for the most time, for most case anyway, the landlord will generally defer that rent. So if you get 6 months free rent, you'll end up with a term of 10 years plus 6 months. Or what they'll do is they'll add it to the latter part of the term. So you'll pay an awful lot more towards the end of the term in those final years. Tenant improvement allowance, this is quite a big one. really the landlord, the way they look at it is that, you know what, it does improve my property, but you know, I'm not a bank either. I'm not a lending institution. If I'm going to give you $50 a square foot to build out your practice, I want that back. I'm going to ensure that there's a guarantee, but I want to make sure that that money again is baked into the term. And you know, especially towards the end of the term, I'm going to make sure I get my money back plus interest. Landlord work, much in the same. Really, this is coming out of the landlord's pocket. You know, if they have to pay service people, if they have to provide materials, again, they'll want to put that back in the lease. So Matthew, maybe you can explain what happens with $5,000 a month.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is exactly what Andrew was just touching on, right? When we're looking at those annual increases, when you're looking at that base rent, right? $5,000 a month, depending on where you are geographically, of course, may seem very reasonable. And you know, it's only $60,000 a year. Now, looking at increases of 3%. Now, there is a caveat to that 3% increase component. Most landlords these days that you know, Andrew and I are seeing leases coming across or proposals that are coming across our desks for doctors, either renewing, looking at starting a new location or starting from scratch, whatever the case may be. Most landlords are looking at somewhere in between 5 to 8% annual increases these days. Now, don't get me wrong, just as base rent is very negotiable, so is your annual increase. But just looking at a 3% annual increase, something that's, you know, very reasonable. This was the standard, so to speak, over in commercial real estate for, you know, the past decade, if not more, right? But as we look here, if you look at year one at $5,000 a month, you are paying $60,000 a year. Well, just within your initial 10 years worth of term, looking at year 1 to year 10, your rent per annum has increased by $18,286, right? Not an insignificant amount of money. In year 1, that would have gotten you another 3.25 months of term, just for that $18,000 more, right? So as you're looking at this, even if we're to jump from year 1 to year 30, your rent has more than doubled per annum, right? You're dealing with $60,000 versus $143,000 per year, right? So when you're looking at this, right, the way I like to describe a lease agreement is as a check, right? In essence, when you sign that lease, you're signing a check to the landlord for that amount of money, right? And with that, you know, if you were about to sign a check over to somebody for $687,000, almost $688,000, wouldn't you want to know every single string and condition that was attached to that dollar value, right? Because unfortunately, most doctors, we look at the tenant, we look at the landlord, we look at how long is the lease and what is the monthly rent, and that's it. We don't think about, you know, the other pages and all the other terms and conditions that are associated with that. But the main point that I did want to illustrate here is that, yes, we may think of the lease agreement of it, oh, it's only $5,000 a month. But over a 30-year period, you've given the landlord $2.9 million, right? Most dentists stay in the same location for 25.5 years to 29.5 years, right? So when the landlord's looking at you and going, okay, $5,000 a month over the next 30 years, wow, look at that. I'm looking at $2.9 million worth of recognizable revenue, right? So when you're looking at the negotiations, whether it's a renewal, whether it's a start from scratch scenario, you have leverage just looking at that $2.9 million.
Right. Thank you, Matthew. All right, so let's cover some of the steps for success, all 9 for a practice startup. Number 1, create a business plan. Well, this should be expected with any new business. Obviously, there needs to be a certain amount of flexibility. Business plans do move around, but there will be one interested party to that business plan, and that would be wherever you're getting your financing. Definitely want to look to see on where their dollars are going to be spent with regards to marketing, equipment, etc., etc. Choosing the right team. I think this is probably number 1 for me. And, I would try and ensure that, as many team members are dental specific. So that is, financing, accounting. Also, we're going to be looking there at lease negotiations, site selection. We'll also, be wanting to think there about maybe your general contractor, your design and layout, your equipment people. So site selection, well, this is my area. This is the one where I could easily do another webinar on. There's so much in site selection. I love site selection. I'm actually, like Matthew's fascinated with data, I'm fascinated with site selection. Some of the components we'll just touch on, things like access, demographics, competition. We're looking at depending on who your patient are, we're going to be looking at things like residential versus commercial and surrounding daytime population, so many different things with image and what have you. But really all of those things are secondary to who your customer, who your patient is, what you have to offer those people. For instance, if you're a pediatric dentist, then, having parking's, it's really, really important. For any parent wanting to bring their kids to see you, parking is, that's very, very important indeed. Number 4, reviewing and negotiating the offer to lease or letter of intent. This part, you're really looking at putting in those main components that are very important to you, some of the deal breakers. Also, a letter of intent, offer to lease. This is a time really that you're laying out good faith terms really with whoever you are negotiating. You don't really want to see, sometimes you do see this, unfortunately, after a couple of months of negotiations, say, that they've decided to, open up something that was previously agreed to. It does happen once in a while. You'd want a very rough preliminary office drawings, obviously watching the finances there before everything is finalized. And then you're going to be looking at the, the fine print, if you like, and negotiating the details in the dental office lease, finalizing that part, and obviously making sure that everybody on board is happy with it throughout your team, especially the financing, of course. Then you're going to be looking at stuff that really starts getting a little bit out of your control with regards to finalizing the site design and the construction aspect. I have talked to doctors who've tried to do some of this themselves. I really don't think that's the best use of your time. Things can go very strange. That's coming from a coordinator with regards to trades and people like that, and materials, and on how things can get slowed down, which time is money. Preparing to open, starting to get exciting now. Your marketing should be in place. You've got your staff lined up, and then there we go, off to the races, open your doors. So at Cirrus, we do have something called a new practice checklist. This really gives you an idea of who does what, who should be on your team, who doesn't do, certain things. Please, if this is something that you're interested in, either contact myself or Matthew or Cirrus, and we'll gladly forward this to you. So it's a very rough guide. Let's talk a little bit here about, leverage here, what this means sometimes to your landlord. Basically, what a landlord really doesn't want is a vacant unit. There is nothing worse than a vacant unit to the landlord. So when they look at a dentist, they basically see one of the best tenants on the planet. And I think COVID's proven this as well. You've got the lowest default rating, highest build out costs. As Matthew was saying, you're there for what, 24, 25 years on average. When you compare that with, say, something like, your average restaurant going in there, their default rating, their build out, there's an awful lot of risk there. So when you're putting yourself in your landlord's shoes, you kind of think, well, so what am I worth there to the landlord? And a lot of that comes down to basically security, your covenant. You're pretty solid. It's not like a dentist can up and just, walk away, work from home. So this is really important with regards to, cash flow and predictive income. So, when you actually do the math and you look at the, what can be brought in over 10, 20 years, it does make sense. For yourself in the way of leverage, what I do find is that, not too many doctors really communicate very well with how worthwhile they are as a tenant to a landlord. I see this being an awful mistake. Let's face it, it's pretty hard sometimes to talk about yourself in positive terms. Sometimes you feel a little awkward, and this is always good for a company like Cirrus to step up to the plate and just remind the landlord really on how valuable you are. Plan, prepare, and prioritize. Yes, definitely. This is the way forward. What's most important to you now and in the future, and planning these things out. I think sometimes I do talk to doctors, I'm sure Matthew does as well, that when we mention the lease, they kind of scratch their heads and they say, well, where is my lease? And there's this, they've got on a lease from 10, 15 years ago, or whatever the case may be, and they just can't find it. And I think a lease really should really be reflecting your day-to-day running of the practice. It was entitled, this webinar, how to, profit in 2023. Well, I think you really need to have a good look at your lease there and on how that can actually facilitate that kind of profit moving forward. Just even bringing in, say, specialists. Does your lease allow for that? Buying versus leasing. Haha. Yes, the old story. So what are the three most important things, as they say in real estate? Location, and Matthew?
Timing.
Timing. When it comes down to commercial real estate, it is timing. Very important. There are a lot of myths surrounding whether or not you should buy. With regards to everybody is successful who does buy and hold. Well, I can tell you through many a landlord I know that has gone belly up, that is not always the case. There are a lot of variables with how successful buying property can be. It does, as an entry point, it requires an awful lot of large upfront financial investment. On top of that, you're probably going to face some build out costs as well. And also some money there to keep you afloat while your practice is, up and running. Another thing to consider now, you've got a landlord hat on. How many tenants are there? If it's just one, that's a lot easier if that tenant is you. But what if there's a couple of tenants? Then, now you're going to be looking at managing that property. Are you going to hire a property management company? Or, or do you have no problem being woken up at 6 a.m, being asked to shovel snow? These are things that do happen. But you do have great rental income. If your lease is structured properly, then that it's a great investment as long as those tenants stay there, and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. It does allow you a fair amount of flexibility on how to use the space. Obviously, there are things like permitted use and certain bylaws with regards to that. Also, how much you can build out. Plenty of building codes there. And freedom to control the property. Yes, it's about control, really, being a landlord and making sure that you have, a certain amount of risk there, that you're in control of that risk. Now, when it comes down to actually leasing a property, well, you know, how profitable is that? If you went along with the old myth that you should always buy, then there wouldn't be too many DSOs around. Obviously, their business model does near enough. There aren't too many anyway that will actually be interested in buying the real estate. They make plenty of money, thank you, just from leasing that real estate. It does require for the individual, when you're getting in, it requires a lot smaller in the way of an upfront payment. Instead of jumping in with both feet in the way of a purchase of real estate, here you have that added advantage to, you know, get to know yourself. What are you like as an owner of a business? Not everybody is cut out for it. There's a lot of things all of a sudden. So it's nice to kind of start small and grow from there. We have no shortage of clients who have 6 properties and they're all leased, and they are hugely successful. So you can start small, very easy to grow from there. Greater working capital towards the build out of the practice, yes. Obviously, depending on that lease, you should be able to get good financing. I can tell you that lending institutions are particularly fond of dentists. And there is always that flexibility to relocate or expand. You would definitely want those 2 components reflected in the lease with relocation. Sometimes you can find radius clauses, for instance, especially if you're in a shopping center, that may prohibit you from opening anything, say, within 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers. When it comes to expand, I would want a right of first refusal on adjacent premises. Whereas if I had, say, 4 opportunities and I thought, you know what, if things are going well, I'd like to move in next door, where I happen to know there's, you know, another 900, 1,000 square feet that I could build out and still be running the practice. So I would like that right of first refusal in that scenario. So how to structure your new lease? So there are many provisions that should be on your lease, and at Cirrus we see leases every day, as you can expect. Some of them 2 pages, which are for the most part pretty woeful, and then we have the more thorough kind of 80-page type leases that are provided by asset managers and what have you. So I'm not going to touch on all these components, probably more the salient elements, if you like. I think I'd probably like to start off here with the assignment provision. This is very important with regards to, let's just say, together with assignment as well, you would typically have subleasing as well. This would allow you to bring in other specialties, independent contractors, 1099s, without having, you know, ideally we would like that to be addressed, whereas we're not always having to ask consent of the landlord and giving them an opportunity to, you know, think to themselves, aha, you know, here's an area here. If I give consent, that maybe I can get a little bit more money. Your assignment here, we're also wanting to ensure that things like continued liability. So continued liability, say if you were to sell your practice and you weren't actually released from that liability, it may mean in the future, say if the tenant who you sold the practice to were to, say, not pay rent or were to damage the premises in some way, the landlord would then have remedy to actually pursue you. So obviously you don't want to sign up, you don't want to sell up your practice and then 3 years have the landlord's lawyer giving you a call while you're lying on the beach. Demolition clause. This is one that is very tricky. If we are handling a demolition clause with a letter of intent stage, we're going to take a good hard look whether or not this is beneficial for you or not. Demolition clause really gives the right of the landlord to give you notice that they are going to demolish this building in, for instance, typically it would be 6 months. So quite literally, you could be working in your practice and that, you know, that envelope gets delivered there to the front desk and it says, okay, you've got 6 months and you're out. very, very difficult to relocate and incredibly difficult to sell this practice right now. Why? Because whoever's going to purchase this, by and large, they're going to need financing. And let's just say I'm going to sell my practice and get $800,000. You're asking the lending institution to take a risk, basically to give you $800,000, to give the purchaser $800,000, and then be notified in 6 months that it's all over. I'm not too sure how they feel about lending out $800,000 without too much security. Very, very difficult with the demolition. We do have ways to address this, which we would, like to talk to you about if you do have, obviously, such a clause in your contract. Relocation, there's another one there that, to be quite honest with you, I've never really known a success of a relocation. I do hear that they do happen once in a while, but invariably, you've decided this is the site that I like. Say if you are in a shopping center or something like that, or even you might be ground floor and they've decided to move you up a few floors. One of the things, you're probably going to be paying the same amount of rent, but if you can imagine having, if you're a general dentist, having great visibility in the shopping center, lots of parking out front, and then you get notice, sometimes it can be 3 months, and you're moving, down the hallway, paying the same amount of rent, but you're right next to the place where they hem their pants that nobody really seems to go to. This is not good, and you're still locked into the term. And sometimes you can be relocated again. The return investment-wise on that is absolutely disastrous for a tenant for the most part.
Well, and the other component of that as well, Andrew, is its implications on the valuation of the practice as well, right? So, doctors, if you're not aware, some of the major practice brokers that we speak to have told and gone through discussions with us that a relocation clause in the lease can actually devalue the practice by $250 per square foot, right? And that's minimum $250 per square foot. So you have a 2,000 square foot practice, you're looking at a potential devaluation of $500,000. Right. So, from Andrew's perspective, absolutely. Very costly, very time consuming to have to undertake that relocation, especially if it's forced, right? And has to be done within certain timeframes. There could be shutdowns, there could be a number of unforeseen circumstances that crop up. But also, not only for our continuity and security right now, we also have to think about the long-term goals and objectives. As Andrew said, when we're talking about prioritizing, looking at what that pathway looks like for you, we also have to think about, okay, well, how does this current document, how does it and how it's structured affect my practice sale 15, 20 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever the case may be. Right? Because it's just as important as it is for you to secure your continuity, but also extremely important for you in regards to the saleability of the practice as well. And we want to make sure that you're retaining full value on that investment.
Yeah. And that relocation clause, that can be found in lots of different places within the lease. It's not always under that heading, relocation. Death and disability clause, definitely. As a dentist, you're not like other tenants, right? You are the sole breadwinner. You're the only really source of income, well, for the most part anyway, coming into the practice. So, you have a 10-year term. What would happen to you, say, if you were to slip and fall awkwardly on your wrist in such a way that it would be very difficult for you to practice? Long-term disability, maybe, you couldn't practice again. So who's on the hook here for this 10 years? It's certainly not the landlord. And you'll probably find within your lease, there will be a section there that will be devoted to, your successors, your heirs. And if something really bad were to happen, sometimes also your estate. Who is left on the hook? So what we would want to ensure here is that you do have this provision, a death and disability provision, which would allow you, if there were such an event, or your estate, if you were to die, to basically sell your practice and get some money for that asset, that value, or to basically terminate the lease altogether within a certain number of months. So we've had great success in adding this to leases over the years. Last thing is personal guarantees I want to touch on. For a lot of people, when they're signing in as a tenant, they use a corporation. If it's first time around especially, you're going to find a landlord will want a personal guarantee. They do not, as I said, I think earlier on, do not want to be left with an empty unit that's costing them an absolute fortune to relet, and they certainly don't want they don't want to have laid out an awful lot in tenant improvement allowance that they're not going to get back either. So a personal guarantee, they want to be able to ensure that you can't just wind down the business and just be off and move out the next day. They want to basically, a personal guarantee makes it a lot easier for a landlord to pursue you. We have success again with personal guarantees, whether or not we can stricken them, sometimes lessen them. It really all depends on your situation. So I'd like to give everybody here just a little chance here to look over this option to renew provision. Let's see if I'll give you a few minutes here if you can identify some of the red flags. We see these daily. Matthew, has that been 2 minutes?
I don't think it's been quite 2 minutes, but
okay, we'll leave them. Matthew's a lot more generous than I.
No, I think if you did see the red flags, certainly a kudos to you. But if you didn't, don't feel bad. It's often very much overlooked, and this is a key component, certainly, right? This is going to be controlling your long-term continuity in the space. Once again, the saleability of the practice in the future and beyond.
Okay, 2 minutes are up, Matthew. So let's see if we got the first one. Provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant. I'll stop right there. So this is what we kind of term as basically the option to renew is personal to the tenant. That means that if you were wanting to sell the practice, the option to renew would be null and void. So obviously, if you've only got, say, a couple of years left and you've got 2 5-year options to renew, the financing people would be very happy for your purchaser to come in. Not so happy, though, when those options are taken away. Next part there that's highlighted, any such renewal shall be on the landlord's then current standard form lease. Now the landlord gets to dictate brand new terms to you. Not a great situation to be in. Really, the options to renew should be the benefit for the tenant, not so much the landlord. In no event, in no event shall it be less than the rent paid in the last year of the original term. Sometimes I will look at leases and I'll go back 20 years thinking, how did they get to this number? This is outrageous. And if you recall, when I was mentioning in the beginning about, adding on towards the latter part of the initial term, things like tenant improvement allowances. So it means that that very last year is really at its highest. And now they're going to renew for even more. I mean, when are you going to stop paying for these tenant improvements? How many times are you going to keep paying for them? And sometimes I even see this when the lease has been assigned to somebody else and it's gone on and on and on, and the base year looks nothing like it really should be in the data. As Matthew explained, you know, that data is really what backs everything up in a negotiation. Here you've got a term just saying, no, it's not going to go down. Again, if you were a purchaser coming in and you saw that, not a good situation at all to be in. Based on the market rent for renewing tenants in the building. While, you know, I'm not going to really rely on my neighbor to dictate those numbers to me. I don't know what situation they are in. I don't know how much tenant allowance they've been allotted. I don't know, have they bothered any kind of negotiation? You know, quite frankly, we don't even see people who even, you know, reach a compromise on a number. They right away just agree with that first number. So in that earlier example, never mind $22, they decide to pay $24, especially for people just coming in. Why? Because they've got so many things going on. They're pretty excited that they found a place. And the broker basically puts that lease in front of them and say, this is the best I can do. And they sign right there. And that's $4 a square foot. So we could go back if we had enough time and rework some of Matthew's numbers. But I think, you can tell on how, on how this can affect rents in a building here if you're going off a neighbor's negotiations, which might never have happened. So what happens if you do miss that date, that option to renew? Well, this is something actually that was sent to one of our doctors in 2018. And this is the landlord writing to the doctor. It says, as you know, your lease expires on November 14th, 2018. Pursuant to section 2.4 of your lease, you had an option to renew the lease for 5 years at market rate. However, you were required to give me written notice of your intention to renew by not later than 6 months prior to the expiration of your current lease term. By my calculation, you were required to give this written notice by no later than May 14th, 2018, which you did not do. Please be advised that my broker will be placing a for lease sign in a conspicuous, but non-intrusive place on the premises this week. He will only show the premises to prospective tenants during business hours. I can't see that being awkward. That's, these are basically mild threats, if you like. And he will attempt to contact your office before any showing. Of course, we can still try to reach an agreement with you. So please feel free to have your broker call my broker. Wow. Do we really think now, with the clock ticking down, how much leverage have we lost here? Now, landlords aren't naive. And for the most part, they know how much every tenant generally brings in per square foot. They know what the neighboring vacancies are, and they certainly know how long it will take you to build out and find another practice. If you've only got, what now? Let's just say you've got 5 months left on your lease. This is not a great situation to be in. Okay, that brings us actually quite nicely to the tenant lease cycle. So when should you start negotiating? We recommend 24 months. We would like to see if we can get the landlord to the table at 24 months. Why? Because we know on average, for you to find a good location, you're going to have to go through a period of site selection. You will then might, very well need to then go through extensive negotiations with the landlord. You now need permits, drawings. Some of these permits at the moment have been delayed an awful lot because of COVID, as I said, from the local government, just not even having enough staff in the planning department. On top of that, we're looking at shortages with some trades and also materials. Sometimes we are lucky and we can find something in 8-9 months. Maybe it was a dentist previously and it was vacated for one reason or another. But you know, I think for most of the part, this is just blue sky thinking. You know, really. So we want to go in at 24 months. We want to get an idea here of, you know, what the landlord is thinking as well. If we have no more options left, and the landlord may well have promised this unit to somebody else, I think it's in our best interest to find out sooner rather than later. So this is a little bit about the Cirrus process. We have 8 pieces of the pie. First of all, number 1, gather all documentation. So if it was a renewal, we will want amendments, estoppel certificates, all the relevant documents we will need. If it's a new, you know, not just the LOIs, but also any kind of things that will affect maybe the permitted use, whatever the case may be, anything really that the landlord's asking you to sign, and also the broker. Number 2, we will certainly want to cover what your practice and career goals are. Have a good think through on that. We'll want to review the office lease for the risks. You know, what are we really looking at here? Are these risks, you know, can we live with these risks, or are they deal breakers? And we need to, you know, have a think again. Prepare with market research. Yes, we need that data. How can we really, you know, step forward to the landlord and say, look, we know that it's this amount of money based on, without that data to back it up. Number 5, outcome and strategy development. This is where Cirrus would basically, we go over the strategy with the doctor. What is your priority here? Let's really look to see, right, what do we really want, especially if you're new. It might be things like exclusives, term, options, of course. We'll look at guarantees, but we want to structure, we want to have a priority, you know, bucket number 1, bucket number 2. What really doesn't matter at this stage, you know, we would like, nice to have, but really it's not a deal breaker. So that's 5. Now, let me ask Matthew. Matthew, number 5, what have we not done now? What do we generally see doctors make the mistake of?
Yeah, we're 5 steps through the process, right? We're over halfway through. And the thing that we still have not done is reach out to the landlord, right? I mean, the biggest mistake that I see on a daily basis is we see that the lease is coming up for expiry, or we see that our option to renew is coming up. You know, we know that we want to make some changes, but we just pick up the phone and go, oh, hi, landlord, I'm ready to renew, or I want to extend. Well, now you've taken yourself out of the driver's seat and sort of put yourself into the passenger seat and let the landlord drive the course. Because when you're coming to the landlord, having gone through these 5 steps, knowing what we need to do, what are those high, medium, and low priority items for that negotiation? What do we know that we need that lease to look like for us? Well, that just gives us a heck of a lot more of an understanding of what we need to do and the message that we need to convey to the landlord, rather than just going, hi, I'd like to stay, tell me what you need.
Exactly. Number 6, so we reach out to the landlord, we start the negotiations. We like to generally start off with the financials. We find out once we get the numbers right with the landlord, it's a lot easier to move on to the legal terms, which sometimes, you know, if we just, you know, if we take a step back, say things like just death and disability, you know, these in the long run can cost an awful lot more than $1 per square foot. Lastly, number 8, final review and execution. We like to have a thorough look at that final lease. It has been known before that a landlord has inserted a clause right at the final minute, hoping that we won't catch it. Obviously, we have the software. We're really on top of these types of situations. We're looking out for it to ensure that this hasn't happened. Even one word, replacement, can cost you $300,000. Then once we are satisfied with that, then we can discuss the execution of that final lease. So for those that don't know, we've got probably around about 300 Google reviews, 5-star. I'll touch on a couple here. So here's one from Dr. DeMarco. I recently worked with Cameron. This would be Cameron Bryant. He's been with Cirrus Consulting Group here for 10 years, still with us. So Cameron at Cirrus to negotiate my lease for a startup dental practice I am building. The lease negotiation process went very smoothly and Cameron was very professional and prompt at handling any questions/issues. I would highly recommend Cirrus as they helped me feel at ease and made me feel confident I was getting a fair deal and would protect me in the long term. I do have to mention this one. This is Dr. Bintori. My husband and I used Cirrus for our lease negotiation. It was a long, bumpy ride prior to engaging them. We had no idea where to start as this was our first office. We felt like the local real estate agent was rushing us to close the deal so he could get his money and leave as soon as possible. Being a former broker, I can, yes, that is possible. At that point, we engaged Cirrus, Scott Goldberg. Now, this is why I brought this up. Scott Goldberg has just finished, well, actually just celebrated, I should say, 20 years at Cirrus Consulting Group. Scott Goldberg has probably negotiated more dental office leases than anybody on this planet. We're still very fortunate to have Scott with us. Scott Goldberg was our lease negotiator. He is very thorough, punctual, and spot on. No kidding, he's always first to the office. We are happy with our lease and hope that it will keep us protected. I would highly recommend Scott Goldberg to anyone in their lease negotiation leads. Now, I'm not going to go all the way through 300, which I'm pretty sure you're happy to hear, but they can be reviewed at Cirrus. Matthew, I think you speak best really on the lease consultation.
Yeah, so this is also one of our other core competencies, right? So as Andrew mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, right, we represent dentists across the country, across North America, for that matter, in their dental office lease negotiations. Right now, one of our other core competencies is what we call a critical dates and risk analysis, right? Or a lease consultation, essentially. Now, through our lease consultation, this is normally a $2,000 service, right? Where Andrew, myself, or one of our team members will go through the lease agreement, spend 3 to 4 hours analyzing the lease for traps, red flags, liabilities, etc. Now, for any of you that don't have a lease agreement in place today, what we also do through this, for those that don't have a lease, is we go through that plan. What does it look like going from step A to step Z all the way through, and coach you and give you a good understanding of things that need to be looked after? What does that look like? How do we pivot and go that way? Components on site selection, etc. And through this conversation, we go through a call. It's anywhere between 45 to 60 minutes, where we go through you and your vision plan, right? So as Andrew had mentioned earlier, getting that tangible understanding of your situation. We uncover any traps in either the lease or in the commercial real estate planning, new start planning, etc., and what they mean to you, right? And then we go through what the ideal lease agreement actually needs to look like for you, right? Because it's all well and good to just take that lease, but if it's not ideal, it can be that hurdle, right? And then we want to make sure that you're getting something out of the call. We're giving you a tactical plan, if you will, right? How to effectively negotiate that lease agreement itself, right? Now, as I said, this is typically a $2,000 value, but as a courtesy to everyone in attendance to this evening's webinar, we will be making that completely complimentary. So what I will do now, right? If you are interested, Andrew's contact details are just there at the bottom there. But I also will pull up a quick poll here for everyone. So that if you are interested, Andrew or myself will reach out to you and help facilitate and set up that conversation. But I'll just launch the poll here. So if you are interested, please feel free to fill that out. And like I said, Andrew and myself will reach out to you and help facilitate that, certainly. Now, what I will do as well is that I'll open up the floor. We have a little Q&A section here that we'd be more than happy to walk through with everyone. And if you do have any questions about the content today, happy to answer them live. You know, if you have other questions that you want to discuss in further detail, please feel free to reach out to Andrew or myself. We'll be more than happy to address that personally with you. I do have one question here in regards to, it's asking, how much leverage in lease negotiations do I have with the landlord if the lease is to be assigned to me? So great question, Andrew. I can tackle that first, and then if you have anything else to add, please feel free. But a ton of leverage, Doctor. You know, it is a situation where you are now becoming the new tenant, right? You now have this new track record, and you need to have certain parameters met in order to make sure the landlord is still being paid rent and being paid rent on time. So as such, as you're going through those negotiations, through the acquisition of the practice and the actual assignment of the lease agreement, right, you definitely do have leverage. Now, there's certain levers to pull and push and, you know, what have you through that process. But as I said, if there's a gap, if the last thing the landlord wants in any way, shape, or form is an empty space, they don't want any uncertainty in the space. It's all about bolstering your quality as a tenant as well as the individual that's coming in and acquiring. Now, there are obviously a couple other components that are involved in that process that may need to be adjusted and configured appropriately, but that's all part of the process. Be happy to speak with you on that, you know, in a much more specific way, very pointed to your situation there for sure. Do you have anything to add there, Andrew?
Yeah, I also think it shouldn't be really viewed with an awful lot of apprehension. I mean, obviously there are some things to look out for within the lease, but also it's an opportunity really as well to, you know, to recognize that the landlord here does have that income. They have predictability, they have security. It's also a time there to just see if the landlord's got some extra dollars there for a number of things that you may want updating.
Certainly, yeah, that's a great point as well. Excellent. Any other questions here? I'm seeing another one here from Dr. Smith. He wants to know, Andrew, I know that this is actually something you just dealt with recently. You know, I'm currently past the 2-year window. I'm actually closer to 6 months. Is it still worth trying to negotiate with the landlord?
Yes, very much so. I think, you know, in this situation, we handle a fair number of these, and we've had great success even with some doctors who are month to month, who've left it that late. There sometimes can be issues, say, if there is a change of landlord, and they have different ideas. But I think to approach in much of the same way as we outlined previously with the 8 steps, and you know, we don't charge in, just so you know, we don't charge in like an 800-pound gorilla in our negotiations with a landlord. We don't try and push them around, as you know, that's really not the best way forward. But what we want to do is ensure that, you know, we can bring the landlord here to the table and, you know, see what really can be done. We've had great success in the past. No, doctor, I don't think you have left it too late at 6 months. But I would suggest that you send either myself or Matthew the lease as soon as possible.
Certainly, right. We're not too late, right? We can become too late very quickly.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be backed up against the wall with only 1 month to go and trying to figure out what to do.
And the landlord as well, Matthew, is not really sure, right? They don't know what the intent here is of the dentist. Does it mean that the dentist is about to leave? And all that's in their mind, is like, am I going to be left with another empty space here for 8 months? And then I've got to pay free rent. And then, I might have to convert from a dentist all the way to something like an empty shell, for me to facilitate that leasing.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, I know we've gone slightly over time here with everybody. It's 9:35 Eastern here, so we're about 5 minutes over. But I did just want to thank everyone for attending this evening's webinar. If you do, like I said, if you do have any further questions, concerns, or otherwise, please feel free to reach out to Andrew through his contact details there, or you can reach myself or one of our associates through info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com as well. But a number of lease consultation requests here this evening. Looking forward to speaking with each and every one of you. And Andrew, thank you very much for presenting this evening. I hope everyone found it as insightful as usual. And once again, thank you very much, everybody. And looking very much forward to speaking with a number of you very, very soon.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.